I'm rolling, Dad.
Okay. 3, 2. As you see, we have now repositioned ourselves in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The light was so great over there, I wanted to use the columns to explain the three main personalities, Adam, Abraham, and Antichrist, and the periods of time, 2,000 years between Adam and Abraham, 1,000 years between Abraham and Antichrist. Now, the reason I go to Antichrist is because of one of the Gentile world powers. There will be 7 Gentile world powers. Chapter 17 of the book of Revelation, verse 10, says there were 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. It's so interesting that as you think that through, we come to the understanding of how the Gentile world powers would have played out down through the centuries. The first Gentile world power was the Egyptian Gentile world power. You might remember when Abraham got the Abrahamic covenant, the Lord said to Abraham, I will take you and your people, the Jewish people, out of the land into a foreign land for 400 years. Well, they went into Egypt, and Jacob took 70 of his family. Some 400 years later, book of Exodus, chapter 12, we see that 600,000 men, plus the children and the women, approximately 2 million people, had come from a family now to a nation. 2 million people were going to make their way towards the promised land. Because of unbelief, they would travel in the wilderness for a 40-year period of time. Joshua takes them into the promised land. The Lord then gives them judges to direct how the humankind would be led by God on the earth at that time. But remember, he had instituted back in Genesis chapter 9 and verse 6 human government, and then in chapter 10 of Genesis we have nations coming into existence. So he's going to use human government to lead nations in his will. He puts within the heart of human world leaders his will to be accomplished. Well, the Egyptian Gentile world power would be in place after the book of Joshua and into 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel is the record of the first king of Israel, King Saul. 2 Samuel, the second king of Israel, was David. And then Solomon, David's son, would be the third king of Israel, and that's in 1 Kings. In 2 Samuel chapters 5, 6, and 7, the Lord is going to give Jerusalem to the Jewish people. Now this is 3,000 years ago, and that's very important to understand. 3,000 years ago in 2 Samuel chapter 5, God gives David the city of Jerusalem to be the political capital of the Jewish people. In chapter 6, David brings the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. That makes it the spiritual capital of the Jewish people. And God in chapter 7 gives David the Davidic covenant, which would make it the eternal capital of the Jewish people. King Solomon would build that temple, and he would rule and reign for a 40-year period of time until 1 Kings chapter 11, at which time the 12 tribes were divided. 10 went into the north, they would be called Israel. 2 stayed in the south, they would be called Judah. And that comes to the end of the Egyptian Gentile world power. The Assyrian Gentile world power would defeat the Egyptians and take over, and they would actually, in 722 BC, take those 10 tribes into captivity. Now, 2 Kings chapter 17 gives us the record of that capture of the 10 tribes of the north, and in the 19th chapter of 2 Kings, we see that they came back, the Assyrians wanted to take the 2 southern tribes as well. However, that night the Lord showed up and killed 185,000 of the Assyrian soldiers. We're going now through the Assyrian Gentile world power. The last thing that happens in the Assyrian Gentile world power before the Babylonians defeat them is that Josiah, the very important king of Judah, he took the Ark of the Covenant out of the temple and put it into a special secret, secluded hiding place where he he put that Ark of the Covenant into a secret, secluded hiding place. Had he not done that, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, would not have been able to come into Jerusalem to defeat the Jewish people, to destroy the temple, and to devastate the city of Jerusalem and take the Jews into the captivity. They were there in the Babylonian captivity because God was using human government to accomplish His will. What was His will?
Hold on, I'm not.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. They were there in the Babylonian captivity to accomplish the will of God. They were there in the Babylonian captivity to accomplish the will of God. God was using human government. Jeremiah said in the 25th chapter and the 29th chapter that he would take the Jews out of the land for a 70-year period of time because they failed to give the land a Sabbath, a Shabbat, as called for in Leviticus chapter 25. Well, the Babylonian captivity accomplished that, and by the way, it brought all 12 tribes back together. These 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. That Babylonian captivity also accomplished the task of bringing all 12 tribes back together. So 2,500 years ago, all 12 tribes were back in the land of Israel at the time of the... So 2,500 years ago, all 12 tribes were back in the land of Israel as the Medo-Persian Empire came into place and defeated the Babylonian captivity.
Jimmy.
You gotta watch it, let's see if you...
Jimmy. Dad, we can't, it's a handicap ramp. Those people, but Jimmy got in the shot when he came back. I think I got out of it, but...
Maybe come and sit here and stop people from telling them to go around.
Yeah, ask them to go around.
Let's wait till this flight goes by.
You ready? When are you going to start?
What?
You ready?
Let's wait till this flight goes by.
All 12 tribes would be allowed by the Medo-Persian Empire, and the king of the Medo-Persian Empire, which was Cyrus, a man who had been given, a man who God had prophesied would come to power. Isaiah chapter 44 and 45. Cyrus allowed all of the Jews, Cyrus would allow 50,000 of the Jews to go into Cyrus would allow 50,000 of the Jews to return to Jerusalem and build the temple. That's the book of Ezra, chapter 2. That temple was finished, Ezra chapter 6. They had the dedicatory service, and that's how God used human government to get the Jews back into the land after the Babylonian captivity. Alexander the Great then came to power. He was a ragtag. Alexander the Great then came to power. He used a ragtag military operation. And in 11 years, from the time that Alexander the Great was 21 years old until the time that he was... You don't pay attention. What do they think we're doing?
Because they all line up here.
And then at the time of Alexander he was 32, he had captured the known world and became the leader of the world and was headquartered in the city of Babylon. What's so interesting, again, the Lord was using human government to accomplish his will. One of the outcomes of Alexander was at the time of his death at 32, his kingdom was divided into 4 parts. One of those parts was headed up by a man named Antiochus Epiphanes. And in 168 BC, Kesloff 25, the Jewish month of December the 25th, he desecrated the temple in Jerusalem by slaughtering a pig on the altar. But 3 years to the day later, they reconsecrated that temple. They lighted the menorah, the 7-branch candelabra, and instead of being lighted for 1 day, which is all the virgin olive oil they had, it stayed lighted for 8 days, unless we have the Jewish holy day of Hanukkah. Based upon what happened during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, we see that's where we get December the 25th, for the birth date of Jesus Christ. Well, those are the 5 that have fallen. The book of Revelation chapter 17 and verse 10 says, 5 have fallen, there's 1 that is, and that would be the Roman Empire. And of course, it was the Roman Empire in place with a stability across the world at the time of the birth of Jesus Christ. In fact, that stability was key. The Bible tells us in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, in the fullness of Galatians, you shook your head, Rick. What did it mean?
I had an automatic shut off a certain amount of time, but I'm back on.
Okay. In Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, the Lord said, in the fullness of time, he brought forth his Son, Jesus Christ. That Roman stability, a road system put together by the that Roman stability and the Roman road system across the entire continent of Europe and in the Middle East would allow for these missionaries that were to go forth and give the gospel message of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It would give them a path by which they could follow a stability in the world. Remember, there was a common currency in the Roman Empire, the denarius, and they had a common language, Koine Greek. And when the Jewish people had been in the Babylonian captivity, the synagogue system came into place. So then these missionaries traveling down the Roman road with a denarius, the common language, with a denarius, the common currency, and that common language, Koine Greek, they could go into a synagogue and at that point in time start to reason with the Jews about the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Well, that Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. Know it? Well, that Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. Though we understand the fall of the Roman Empire did take place, it did not disappear. Because the Bible tells us in Daniel chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, where it talks about the 10 horns in verse 7, the little horn in verse 8. That's talking about the revival of the Roman Empire. You can determine that by looking at verses 23 and 24 of Daniel chapter 7, for the purpose of interpreting the passage of Scripture and the prophecy about the revived Roman Empire and the Antichrist. Verse 8 calls him the little horn, one of 27 names for the Antichrist, the little horn. Then in chapter 9 and verse 26 of the book of Daniel, he's referred to as the prince that shall come. Daniel chapter 11, verse 36, the willful king. Matthew chapter 24, the false Messiah. 2 Thessalonians, the wicked one, son of perdition, man of sin. Book of Revelation chapter 13, the beast out of the sea. And then, of course, in 1 John chapter 2, we have the name we know him best by, the Antichrist. This was setting the stage for the last 7 years of the prophetic events foretold through the ancient Jewish prophets to take place. This is key. I've told you all along the way, the Lord used human government to establish this world to be ready to accomplish his will. Chapter 17 and verse 17 says, God will put into the hearts of human world leaders to accomplish his will. See that Revelation says that's in the future. We'll be talking about that period of time, that very important 7-year tribulation period, in another segment of this documentary. We have to say, God has used human government to accomplish His will and will continue to do so. Thank you. Thank you, folks.
Interview.
Thanks, Rick.